It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
I'm an idiot.
4 minutes in and I'm already wrong.
I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me. You're like a beautiful mind. I'm more like Forrest Gump. So it's,
Craig Price is the man.
I knew it. Craig, shut up.
It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
This week, our old pal Avish Parashar is here to discuss unconventional professionals. Welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you listening. You know, I took most of June off, and when I came back, you were still here. So thank you. Also, don't forget to head over to podcastawards.com and nominate Reality Check with Craig Price for the Society and Culture category. Yeah, the show has grown past the business category, but while you're there, why don't you nominate past guest Tom Singer's podcast, Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do, for the business category, and Matinee Heroes for TV and film. If you don't know, Matinee Heroes is Reality Check's resident film critic Alan Cerny and I's movie podcast where we look at heroic cinema and take life lessons from them. Go to matineeheroes.com and subscribe. Well, today's guest, Avish Parashar, has been on the show plenty of times. It's roundtable discussions and his own episodes, and he's got a new coaching program that caters to unconventional professionals. People who have creative jobs that when you hear about them, you go, huh, they pay you for that? Sometimes, yeah. So being an unconventional professional is tough since almost everyone you know is a very conventional person and has a very conventional job, and often what works for them won't work for you in your weird job. Take me. I not only speak on negativity, a weird topic, I produce conference podcasts, I do conference wrap-ups, and I moderate Comic-Con panels and things. They have plenty of overlap, sure, but their target audiences and the people who hire me can be quite different. So we talked to Avish about how he was able to shift his marketing and business better to enable his unconventional profession to be more profitable, and his coaching program will help other unconventional folks too. So let's talk unconventional professions in a quite conventional interview with Avish Parashar. Avish, it's good to talk to you, man. You are always working on something new, and you've got something you're creating that is for unconventional professionals and creative solopreneurs, which in our business could mean anything. So what exactly are you talking about, an unconventional professional?
So an unconventional professional is someone who's following a career path that doesn't have a kind of fixed A to Z process of getting there. You know, like if you want to be a realtor or a financial planner, I'm not saying it's easy, but there's a process you go through to build that business. But if you want to be, say, a professional speaker or an improv comedian or a composer or any kind of business that's off the beaten path, it can be a struggle because just figuring out how to apply the conventional wisdom to your approach really gets a lot of people stumped. So I'm working on content and a program to help people in that position.
Yeah, because I'm struggling with my moderating. I do that on the side, so I don't really put too much stress on myself for not getting a lot of moderating gigs. But then again, through my research and through my interactions with folks, and I've been really hunting for the last year and a half, not a lot of people know how to do it either. They don't know, or at least how to make a business out of it. They know how to volunteer and do it for free, but there are some people out there that do it, but there's no plan. And I think a lot of people struggle with that.
And if you're like me in that situation, right? I mean, I'm a professional speaker, as are you, and my approach was using improv comedy as a tool, which was different even than a regular speaker. And I don't know if you found this with the moderators, but a lot of well-meaning people would give a lot of well-meaning advice that was absolutely wrong and useless because what I was doing was different. And they were giving me the advice the conventional professional would give.
Yeah, that's what I find out is that whenever you try something different, and I've tried a lot of things different, that's one of the things that I'm really good at. I can really do a lot of things that people go, oh, that sounds like a great idea. I have no idea how to do that. You know, whether it be moderating, whether it be a conference wrap-up that I've done that I've gotten a little traction with, whether it is podcasting for corporations, which has become more relevant lately, but it's still one of those things where people still go, I don't see anybody paying for that. There is no guidebook. You can't get a course book. So you're specializing in dealing with those folks. What's the first thing we have to think about before we jump into a business that we have no plan or no guidebook for, I should say?
Yeah, so the first thing is real clarity on what the offer is. like you have clarity with the moderator thing, you know what that is, but so many people, they have this skill, but they aren't clear on how they want to bring that to the market. They're not clear on who would be their target customer for it. And frankly, even before that, they're not even entirely clear that they even want to do it, right? Because some people will follow a path because it sounds good, or because maybe they got frustrated with the other path. And so they're doing something unconventional, but for the wrong reasons. For example, I got a buddy, he's a brilliant composer, but he was struggling to kind of build his clientele. And so he started writing music for video games, and then him and two buddies formed their own video game company, which seemed exciting, and he had a skill for it. But that also went nowhere, and he eventually went back to composing because the video game thing, while interesting, wasn't really what he was wanting to do, which made it much harder for him to succeed in that arena. And now he's having success as a composer. Clarity is really the first step, and a lot of people skip that step, and that's why you can be brilliant in every other aspect, but if it's unclear, you're not going to get anywhere.
I think we see that every so often when the economy dips, and all of a sudden there's a plethora of speaker wannabes because someone said, "Oh, you speak well at church. You should become a professional speaker," and they're out of a job. They're an accountant, and so they're like, "Well, I better find something." And so they dabble in speaking for a couple months. They go to a couple NSA meetings. They realize, hey, this costs a lot of money, and then they disappear.
Yeah, or they realize that, what's funny about speaking is it doesn't cost that much money. I mean, it can, especially if you get hooked up with the wrong coach. But realize the world's not beating a path to their door to hear their story.
Yeah, but you need a video. You've got to have marketing materials.
Yeah.
So there is some cost that people are shocked at sometimes because to get a good video, and I think every speaker needs not a bad video because you don't have to have a great video. You just can't have a bad video. So you can have an old video.
Yeah, bad video will do worse things for you. And that kind of comes, what we're talking about here is one of the steps after clarity is, the marketing. Really figuring out what's that core. Like for a speaker, I agree that having a great video, a decent website, and maybe a good one-sentence description of what you do is really what you need to really get going building your business. Now, that sounds simple. Not always, getting a good video can take a time. But, different unconventional professions have different core needs in their marketing. Some don't need a video. Some don't need a business card. Some don't need a website. It's just people don't understand that you pick up a book from the bookstore on marketing, and it's going to tell you need X, Y, Z, and so you spend all this money getting stuff that's never going to help you.
People don't have that clarity in mind to become a speaker because they didn't want to. It's something they did because they're out of a job or are looking to change jobs, and they think, oh, well, this is going to be easy. They just jump into speaking not knowing what they're going to talk about, whether what they talk about is worth listening to, how much is involved. It's just that clarity is not there. But I think we see a lot of that in speaking.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people think it's easy to build a speaking business because they don't see the upfront investment like you're saying. And, oh, yeah, I'm a good speaker. People tell me I'm a good speaker. In fact, almost every speaker self-rates themselves far better than I actually think they are. I don't say that meanly because I think, to really stand out in this industry and any industry is you need to be so good. And if you're walking around thinking you're like an 8 out of 10 speaker, you're never going to work on your craft, which means you could have great marketing materials, but you're still going to struggle.
I used to teach defensive driving, and one of the statistics they had is 80% of the people think that they're above average drivers, which is statistically impossible.
Yeah, exactly.
So everybody thinks they're a good driver. Everybody thinks everybody else is bad. Everybody thinks they're a good speaker, or they think they're a horrible speaker. There's nobody who ever thinks, I'm okay at it. They're either awesome or they're awful in their own minds.
Right, yeah. They're either too self-deprecating or too self-aggrandizing.
So we get some clarity. We figure out we're going to try this weird thing. We're going to do something that most people don't do. It's going to be hard to explain to our parents who paid for our financial planning degree.
Yeah.
After clarity, what's the next step?
Well, once you're clear, then it kind of becomes a two-pronged approach. One is that you have to then, we start talking about marketing and marketing materials. You have to put together those marketing materials and then take the marketing activity actions that are things you're going to do consistently and well, but also things your target market will run to. How are they buying and consuming the information? So that's track one. The other track you do kind of simultaneously is work on your offering to make it outstanding, truly outstanding. This kind of comes back to that speaking thing, and I think every professional falls into this. Very few people start their own business because they think they're okay at what they do. Everyone thinks they're really good at what they do. They just need to figure out the marketing. And there was a hard lesson I learned. Is I was in that state for about 6 or 7 years as a speaker. It wasn't until I really said, okay, you need to get better, that my business took off. So, the next part of the process is really kicking yourself in the butt and saying, hey, my business is not where it needs to be. I need to keep getting better at what I do.
So what was that foot? What was the shoe that kicked you in the butt? What was the impetus? Was it kids? I know you've got a great new kid that's 3 years old. He's an awesome little guy. That can make people, sit up and go, I got to focus and I got to actually pay bills now. But was there something that jumped out at you?
Sort of. It predates the kids, but it was interesting. It was at an NSA convention, a Speakers Association convention in 2012, which just happened to be a week before my wedding. And because my business wasn't doing so well, and my fiance at that time, now my wife, wanted to have kids, and she would love to be a stay-at-home mom. For the sake of full disclosure, there were certain financially motivated discussions, let's just say. It was really getting to a point of, man, am I going to have to give this up? Because I've been trying it for a while. And then at that NSA convention, I just, sometimes you see something and it's not what they say, but it just clicks something in your head. I saw a speaker by the name of Dan Thurman, who he kind of combined speaking, motivational speaking with juggling and acrobatics. And I thought it was pretty amazing. But something clicked in my head when I saw that and said, this comes back to the clarity thing a little bit too. I realized I had been trying to position myself incorrectly as a speaker, that I always saw myself as a humorist because I use improv comedy. And what I realized, no, I don't want to be a humorist. I need to be like the Dan Thurman of improv comedy. Like I need to demonstrate mastery and be amazing, which I wasn't doing. And I realized that was the only way it was going to work for me. And it's the only way I was going to be able to stay in business, because I kind of made a deal with my wife that if I couldn't get my revenue to a certain point, like I was going to start looking for a job. So it's kind of the combination of the stick of my potentially having to quit and the carrot of seeing this inspiration of what I could be if I really put my mind to it.
Yeah. One of the things I've learned at NSA is you do not want to market yourself as a humorist unless you were a mid-tier or higher stand-up comedian. You may be funny, you may be humorous, but to market yourself as a humorist, you better be damn funny. I immediately learned that like in the first 2 or 3 years that I'm like, I am not a humorist. Do not try to book me as a humorist. Am I funny? Yes. Did I used to do stand-up? Yes, and I was okay at it. Am I funnier than the average speaker? Probably. But to market yourself as a humorist, you better be really, really funny. And my humor is real hit or miss. So I can't guarantee that they're all going to laugh at the same joke the same way every time I tell it. So just go with your information, go with what your expertise is, and then at the end use I'm also funny as a close to sell. Right.
And what's funny about that is I started the same way as you, saying I'm not a humorist. Don't put me as a humorist or comedian, because people would in the beginning. They'd say, "Oh, it's a comedian." I'm like, "Oh man,
you don't get paid as much."
So many people started making that mistake that I said, "Okay, well, I'm going to lean into it, and I'm going to put myself in the humor category." So I actually started studying stand-up and working more into that my material. But again, come back to clarity and why you're doing and what you're doing. For some reason, it took me years to figure out, like, hey, you know what? Instead of trying to be funny doing stand-up, which is not your background, why don't you find ways of doing more improv, which you have done for 15, 20 years?
Not only do you have to be awesome, which, being outstanding it's a definitive thing. You have to be much better than the average person to promote yourself, especially in a speaking world. But if you're doing something unusual, you're right. You have to be better than that. But I want to get back to the creating content in ways that people actually absorb it. Like you said, making a video is a necessity for a speaker, but it definitely is not going to be necessary for your composer friend. He definitely needs to have audio, something to listen to.
Right.
So how do you figure out what content to create for your audience?
Well, first it comes to identifying, who's going to be the decision maker. And I'm not necessarily talking position, though that helps, but just kind of the mindset of the person who would be hiring you. And, the two ways of doing that, the hard way, but the better way, is to, reach out to these people, and not in a sales way, but, ask them, say, how do you consume information? What are you looking for? Obviously, once you start getting some of those first gigs, because even someone who's not that great can get a couple initial gigs just by falling into them. And that's usually how people get started, right? You do it once, and you're like, oh, let me try to do this again. Yeah. So you got some people to start with. And then maybe this is just me being kind of a creative person. I find real good visualizations help me a lot, like really visualizing myself in the shoes of the person who's going to be hiring me. Like, what would they care about? And there's two things to think about. One is, what do they care about? And, coming back to that 2012 thing when my business shifted, is in the Speakers Association, you've probably experienced this. The rule of thumb is you're not a professional speaker, you're an expert, and no one's paying for a motivational speaker, and people just want content. And so for years, I worried so much about my content until I realized that the reason someone's hiring me is first primarily for the experience I create. The bonus is that I give them valuable tools and techniques. I changed my messaging to be more about the experience, and that helped. So, what's your buyer interested in? Why would they hire you? And number two is, how do they consume information? How do they make their buying decisions? Because I realized no one was hiring me because of my blog. Right? For a while, I put all my effort into daily blogging because everyone was talking about content marketing and internet marketing. And I realized, well, as an improv comedian who creates an interactive experience, no one's going to hire me because they read a really interesting blog post. Now, again, that took me 3 years to realize that. But so it's really understanding those two things is how are they making their decisions and what do they care about?
Well, hopefully you can repurpose some of those blogs into some kind of book, because that's what I ended up doing. I did the same thing. There's so many things to read out there. There's so much content, and that's why I feel like a lot of this content marketing, yeah, it's good to some degree, but I think there's so much out there that I think people ignore a lot of it. And so I blogged for like 2-3 years straight as well, and I'm like, well, nobody read it, so I might as well package it into a book that nobody read, which I'll be able to make into something else that nobody will buy. So it's one of those things. But I don't.
But having the book, will be, hey, Craig's author of 2 books, not just 1 book. So.
Right. but it was one of those things. Hopefully something comes out of it. But what was the realization that nobody's reading my stuff, or no one would read my stuff? It's not a matter of it's bad or it's not well written. It's just that my buyers don't read blogs.
Yep. I came to the conclusion that my buyers don't read blogs, A, and B, they wouldn't hire me because of a blog post anyway, because of that whole experiential thing. And it was funny how much feedback, not that much, right? But people just couldn't people who are in this industry, in my and your industry, couldn't really wrap their minds around me saying I've stopped doing all content marketing because it was so opposite what everyone talks about. I'm like, yeah, it's not working for me, so I just stopped doing it. And they're like, oh, well, have you tried this? Oh, you could do this. I'm like, no, I've just decided that's not how I'm going to get business. And I started just doing direct cold emailing, which a lot of people, again, will tell you doesn't work. No one reads them. Cold marketing doesn't work. And that helped jumpstart my business. That first year I really did, I about 25 to 30% of my business came out of just cold emailing.
Yeah, it works. I don't know why people say it doesn't. It's about how you approach it. It's about not just subject lines that are catchy, because they don't really need to be that catchy. It's about what's in it. Are you offering something of value immediately versus are you just trying to put out breadcrumbs so you can get them on your mailing list?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I found I agree with you, but there's no catchy headline thing. In fact, I found the less catchy the headline sounded, the better it did. Because if it sounds catchy, then people are going to assume it's a sales letter. My subject line, like let's say I'm reaching out to SHRM, which is Society of Human Resource Management, my subject line would just say potential SHRM speaker. Like straightforward, conversational, not like have you ever seen a speaker wow an audience before?
Yeah. I have the same kind of thing. If I'm going to do SHRM, so I'm going to do the Pennsylvania State Association. I'm going to put 2018 because it's later in the year, so I'm looking for next year. I'll put 2018 SHRM PA speaker. I do that for 2 reasons. Number one, so I can track when they reply. When they reply, I know who that is. Oh, it's the Pennsylvania folks. I don't have to guess.
Right, yeah, that's very helpful.
But also, it tells them what I'm doing. They can look at it real quickly and go, oh, hey, I'm looking for a speaker. Boom. And then they can file it away. It's easy for them to search their Outlook, just type in speaker, and I'll come up sooner or later. Because I still get emails from people that I sent 2 years ago. They'll reply to that same email because they took that email and put it in their folder and kept it there for 2 years, and then they're like, well, I need a speaker, and they looked in their mail, and then here's Craig, and then I've seen responses from 2-year-old emails.
Yeah, and I have too, and I always assume when someone's like, oh, our speaker set this year, but we'll add you to our file, I always assume it's a blow-off, and I think a lot of times it is, but every so often I'll get, like you said, a year later, they'll be like, oh, I was going through my file, and, we've got a conference coming up, and I'm like, oh, you were actually sincere when you said you were going to put me in your speaker file.
So for someone who's not in speaking, so like your composer friend,
yeah.
What kind of content should they be kind of looking at that point? Or how do you figure out the content that's perfect for them? Because like I said, we kind of go against the grain because I think the people who are hiring speakers are overwhelmed with the same BS all the time. So to see someone who's a little bit more direct and open like you are and like I am when we send an email, I think it's refreshing and it's appreciated. It's instead of just sending blogs and stuff. I don't personally understand how any of it works when you just send people stuff. It just seems like you're spamming them with your content. Oh, but it's valuable.
Yeah, and some people swear by it now, whether it's working for them or not. I mean, I know people swear by techniques that have never actually worked for them, but just in theory, it's supposed to work, so they say this is the way to do it. Who knows? That's the other thing about. I think you'd be the first person to agree with this is, take all the advice you get with a grain of salt, because half the time the person giving it to you hasn't ever actually implemented that advice successfully themselves.
Or they can't adapt it to what you're trying to do. If I was going to say moderators, people think of moderators at a speaking event, which is completely different. And so all they can think about is how it works in a corporate environment. And it's like, well, this is not a corporate environment. In fact, it's mostly volunteers or it's grassroots. You're dealing with a small group of people who it's like a tight-knit family. It's really trying to break into the family versus trying to break into a company.
Right, which is a totally different animal. And I don't know if you feel this way, but one of the phrases that always makes my stomach drop when like a friend or colleague or even a stranger at a conference says to me, is when they start by saying, you know what you should do? You should just, and I know whatever's going to come out of their mouth after that's going to be nonsense, right? Because they're, without really understanding the market, what I do, how I do it, they're going to give me some simplified advice that, seems good on the surface or works in other industry. Like, people are like, oh, you should just submit a class for college. I think that'd be a great way to do this. I'm like, okay, well, that's a whole other job in and of itself. But to them, it just seems so obvious that's what you should do. So I always my mind turns off a little bit when someone ever starts with the phrase, you should just.
Well, what other pieces of advice have you heard that as someone who is creative and is unconventional that you should ignore, but also maybe there's some pieces that we could latch onto, something that when you hear it, you should actually take it more than just a grain of salt?
You're talking specific advice that I've gotten?
Or in general, or maybe you've heard someone give someone else who is an unconventional professional, because like I said, this is a lot of this is uncharted waters for not only the person who is doing it, but the person who's offering advice. They're offering advice in something they have never done or experienced. Sometimes it's good, though.
Kind of the generalized answer to that is, I would say, the thing that should interest you is when someone asks you questions. Like someone who wants to help you, but really their first priority is really understanding. Trying to understand first who you are, what it is you're trying to do. Because when if you're an unconventional professional and you meet someone, you tell them a little bit, like a couple sentences about what you do, and they immediately launch into, oh, well, here's what you should do. Chances are they don't understand what you're doing. So if they're asking questions, then maybe give a little bit more credence because, okay, they understand. I think advice that, well, here's the thing. The reason it's hard for me to answer that question, and part of the reason I love this approach, is it is so personalized and customized. That's the whole point of this, is that it's coming up with your own answers. So I would say one of the things is when someone gives you a bit of advice and you find yourself rejecting it out of hand, which, from a previous podcast, we talked about this idea of improv, of saying yes, but, which is where you just reject something, is ask yourself, am I rejecting this because it doesn't align with what I want to do, or am I rejecting it because it's going to be hard and force me to grow? If you're really honest with yourself, it can start giving you some clarity as to what advice you should follow versus not, right? So when someone tells me you should pursue a college class, that is not even remotely aligned with what I want to do. So it's easy for me to reject that. When someone says, oh, you should put up a YouTube channel, I reject that but then when I think about why am I rejecting that, I'm like, it's because it's a lot of work and a pain in the ass. Now, that doesn't mean I have to do it, but it lets me know that might have more validity to my purpose, because yes, as a speaker being on YouTube, that might not be a bad way to connect. Now, I'm not going to do that because not every potential good idea needs to be followed, but hopefully that gives a little bit of an idea of how I would recommend advice you take versus advice you ignore.
So you're getting a coaching program together. You've been doing it and working with some unconventional professionals. How can people get involved, and what exactly are they going to expect in this course?
It's a group kind of coaching type program, depending how many people there, anywhere from a handful to 15, meeting regularly via internet, Zoom, Skype type format. It's going to be an interactive type class, so it's not just me talking, giving content. That's easy enough to get. But because of the personalized nature, it's going to be content and then people interacting, kind of coming with their ideas, asking questions, taking them through this process of really how do you get clarity, deciding what you're going to do, figuring out your marketing, figuring out how to make your offer outstanding, getting feedback both from me and other group people, so that at the end of this, about 8-week process, you are poised, with the tools, and you've already started the process of launching and growing your business. To get more information, the first step is actually a phone conversation with me, because the coaching thing is so personal. I'm not going to take people's money. I'd want to make sure that A, that what they need help with is something I can help them with, and that B, it's going to be a good kind of personal relationship, because, man, if you get stuck coaching someone or being coached by someone you don't like, it's pretty horrible.
Yes, I've been in that situation.
Yeah. And so the follow-up then, if it seems good, then, we can talk about, the details about whether enrolling in the program is a good idea, blah, blah, blah.
So where can they find it, and where can they find you?
So my primary speaker website is dinghappens.com, which is DING happens.com. And if you go to the website and watch the video, you'll quickly understand why that's my website name. And if you want information on the program, if you go to dinghappens.com/reality, as in reality check, that'll take you to the page that has the information, a little more information about the program and the unconventional professional thing, and also information about, setting up just a kind of a consult phone call so we can talk and just see, where you're at and whether we think I might be able to help you.
Always appreciate custom URLs for the podcast.
Well, I like to share the love, or at least know where the traffic's coming from.
That's the show. Thanks to Avish for coming on. If you have questions, comments, or guest suggestions, please send them to Craig at speakercraigprice.com. Subscribe to the newsletter and download the app at realitycheckpodcast.com, and follow Reality Check Pod on Twitter. See you next week.